Hello, Keith Prather again, with the September NCM Automotive Economic Outlook. And let me share my screen real fast and we'll get right into this. Okay, so the Automotive Demand Index this month came in with a reading of about 59.9. So this is down from June's 62.3 reading. So we were about 4% lower month over month, showing a little bit of deceleration overall in automotive, but we still remain almost 2% higher year over year. And I don't have it in the data, but we just got a little bit of brand new industrial production data, and we saw that through August, we did just get a surge in industrial production activity. And so specifically, automotive had a really good month. And we saw industrial demand, industrial production grow in August. So that's a good backdrop, at least to what we're seeing kind of more broadly across the industry. There we go. But the one key factor here, and this is the one thing that we talked about last month, and I wanted to just give you an update because we have brand new data. We keep watching real disposable income. If there is one data point that I could go to try and predict and trying to understand where auto sales are heading, it would be this one measure. So this is inflation adjusted disposable income, and it is the money that households have left over after they pay taxes, and typically just a couple of big key spending items like rent or mortgage, and sometimes some essentials like food and utilities. But what we've got is at least a flattening out of the index for now. This real disposable income year over year change is relatively unchanged. We've got about a 1.1% rate of growth as of July. Okay, it's almost flat. This was 1% in the last update a month ago. So we got 0.1% increase on a year over year basis. So not much, nothing to write home about, but at least we didn't see it continue to decelerate. Now we're averaging, or we think we're going to get about 1.4% for the full year, and we're also going to be able to get about 1.4% for next year. So that would still be a fairly sluggish view of at least what disposable income is going to look like. Now, there's a couple of caveats around that, and I think a lot of consumers are kind of waiting to see what happens with the election and with the Federal Reserve because they don't think about it in these terms, but it actually impacts what happens with disposable income. The first thing is to listen to the presidential candidates, and you're going to hear a lot of discussion about taxes. If taxes are increased in some categories, so at the end of next year, you're going to see an expiration of the 2017 tax bill. And once we get to the end of 2025, if certain components of that tax bill are not renewed or made permanent, then you're going to see taxes on categories of consumers go up. And the categories of consumers that we're most worried about are those in the middle income range and the upper income range. And when I say most concerned about, I mean from an automotive perspective. We're concerned about all households, but from an automotive perspective, we are worried about those two categories because they represent the majority of, especially new car spending, but also they represent the majority of good quality used car spending, where a lot of the profitability is. So we are watching that, and any expiration of those tax cuts, or if we see increases in taxes that effectively hit households, that pulls disposable income down. The other thing that could happen is as we continue to see inflation comes down, that technically helps disposable income. And that's really the reaction that we're getting now when we're seeing it flattening out. It's because inflation is coming down at a rate fast enough that it's offsetting any other changes that we see in disposable income, like layoffs, rising unemployment rate, some of those issues. So this is a factor that is, again, we think it could improve over the next remaining part of 2024 and early into 2025, but we're still watching it, at least at this time. And right now it is running behind decade averages that we've had over the last several decades. But the other factor that we're watching is the availability of credit. And so we still don't see any banks tightening credit standards for auto loans. They still remain at zero. What we'd love to see is what we had in a couple of prior cycles, where we see a number of banks loosening lending standards for automotive loans. Right now, we just got this, it's basically balanced. We see banks basically holding steady at whatever the current policy is. So hopefully in the coming months, we'll see a little bit of easing of conditions. The Federal Reserve pulling interest rates down by a quarter point in September, and maybe following that up with a quarter point in December should help banks loosen up some of their lending standards, and I think we will see that dip below zero. But for now, consumers that were able to qualify can qualify overall still. So what we're getting though, from a forecast perspective, is the industry looks like it's kind of flattening out from a production perspective. Again, we just got the industrial production numbers and we saw a little bit of a boost coming out of this month, but I think the forecast here accounts for that. You see a little bit of that uptick in industrial production and automotive. So we predicted that it's going to continue to rise just a little bit before a little bit of a swoon next year, but nothing dramatic. This is not recessionary by any stretch of the imagination, but it is a flattening out. And we still see automotive production being pretty strong in the US, maybe just a hair below the long-term trend. These particular models that we produce are running about 95% accuracy 6 months out, but there is a lot of volatility in this data and in this number right now. So we think production will continue to be pretty stable. This is one of the sectors where sometimes gasoline and oil prices do make a difference. Even diesel prices can make a difference. And so this is the EIA forecast for oil. And what you can see is global production looks like it's going to continue to trend a little bit below global consumption through the early part of 2025. So we get out to Q1 and Q2 of next year, and we do see a little bit of that deceleration. If you look at this inventory analysis shows a net draw from inventories between now, here in the real term, and what we are getting kind of early in 2025, where it kind of balances itself back out. Now, the EIA is taking their crude oil forecast down. They're basically saying a little bit heavier in 2024. We get a reading of about $82 a barrel on average, which is up from 77 a year ago. But current oil prices have actually deflated a little bit, so I wouldn't be surprised if we don't get an adjustment in this forecast from the EIA, over the next several months. For 2025, then a fairly stable rate between the 2 years. With that, then diesel prices stay, stable, if not reducing a little bit, and you start to see 389 a gallon on average this year, followed by about 392 next year. And then gasoline forecast about the same scenario, a little bit down from last year, but fairly stable between 24 and 25. So what the EIA is basically saying is there's just not going to be a lot of volatility in global oil prices. That being said, we all have to watch still the Middle East and the events happening there. We also have some events taking place, obviously, in the Black Sea around Ukraine. And then we've got a couple of areas of tension kind of building in the South China Sea right now. And we're going to watch those very carefully. But thus far this year, hurricane activity has not been as worse as what had been expected, and it's actually been pretty easy on the oil production zones and the refineries that produce diesel and gasoline. So we don't see a lot of changes there. So from an automotive perspective, if you're thinking that changes in oil and gasoline or diesel prices are going to drive demand for certain types of vehicles, you're probably not going to get that response out of the market based on what we see in the current forecasts. Okay, so summarizing everything, we've done this in every video that we've done across all the sectors for NCM, but Q3 right now looks like it's coming in at about 2.5% growth. That's against 5.2% growth in Q3, but the little footnote here is that last year we saw a tremendous amount of inventory building activity going into Q3. Companies were getting ready for the peak retail season, around Thanksgiving and Christmas. And so we saw these inventories build, and that always boosts GDP. This year, we think what happened was that with the Canadian rail strike and then the threat of an East Coast and Gulf Coast port strike this year, by the end of September, that a lot of companies inbounded their inventories early. That's why we got a little better Q2 this year than we had last year, but we have to pay for it in Q3 and Q4. So other components, though, consumer spending, government spending, and what looks like corporate spending, all still seem to be pretty stable. It's this inventory number that's kind of really making GDP come down. So fundamentally, it looks like the economy is still doing pretty well. So if we get a Fed rate cut in September and one in December, as we talked about, a quarter point each, it takes a while for that to translate and flow down into the banking system and move through the automotive and any other big ticket item spending. We won't see interest rates cut on those overnight, but it will trickle down, and over the next 30 to 60 days, you'll start to see those interest rates ease. But two other factors to point out real fast is that again, the stock market is going to be interesting to watch. Right now, we're right at or near all-time highs. The Federal Reserve is helping that. September typically is a down month for the stock market, but this month so far continues to see some nice stability in the stock market. Last year, we generated about $900 billion in brand new stock wealth. That translated into about $288 billion in additional consumer spending based on most estimates. And so we know we're going to get a little bit of that effect. It won't be as dramatic as this year, but we'll get a little bit of this effect moving into the end of this year, and then especially once we get beyond the election into 2025. The other thing, and we have it in all the written briefings this month, is this notion of a great wealth transfer. And the great wealth transfer is just simply as the baby boomer generation gets older and as they get to the point where they're transferring their wealth down to younger generations, we're suddenly seeing younger households, get spending wherewithal that's adding $1 million to $2 to $3 million of spending capacity into those households. And so a lot of them are going out and taking a portion of that money and a portion of that inheritance, and they're using it to go upgrade their automobiles and to do some luxury things like in the marine and the power sports sectors, RVs, and that whole sector. The problem is that that spending comes sporadically. It's a one-off, one household at a time. Sometimes they come in waves. Sometimes it's just a single one. But that's why sometimes the luxury items on a lot of our showroom floors are still selling and price is almost no object if they can get exactly what they want versus maybe down in the economy area of models, and those units aren't moving as fast. That's where a lot of pressure is on those households, and you don't see the wealth transfer translating into people going out and buying economy cars, right? They're going out and they're spending that cash on stuff that's a little higher end. So those are two factors that I think can still play in the background here. But that's basically what I had for you this month. I hope this was valuable. Reach out to me anytime with further questions, and we'll look forward to seeing everyone next month. Have a safe month, and we'll see you in October. Thank you.